good morning to all of you joining from Europe. Good afternoon to all of you attending from China. It's a pleasure to have you here today. We're going to assess the biotech market in China, trying to understand the opportunities for European SMEs and trying also to provide an assessment of what are the regulatory challenges that enterprises face for what concerns this market. I would like to thank you all for attending, to thank our MOU partner, Genopole, for hosting this event with us, as well as the China IP SME Helpdesk to taking part today, and Cisema for participating as speakers. I would like to, as the very first thing, leave the floor to Alexis Bitton, the International Affairs Coordinator for Genopole, for his introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Davide, and welcome everybody to this webinar. So I'm Alexis Bitton, working for Genopole. I'm part of the international development team. We support our companies and research centers in going abroad together with my team, Cedro Gononophan and Alain Luzardi. The idea of this webinar in partnership with the EU SME Centre is really to provide you with all the elements you would need in case you want to access the Chinese market. So we do not have, of course, the pretension to cover all this, the complexity of this Chinese market, but we'll try at least to address some of the challenges that you may have concerning mainly the IP, but also the broad view about the economical environment in China. A couple of words about Genopole. Genopole is a biocluster. We are located south in Paris. We represent 80 companies in biotech. And our idea is really to help, of course, our companies, but also European companies together with our partners. We've got a lot of partners across Europe, different clusters, to expand outside of Europe. As you understand, we are in a competitive world. It's getting harder and harder sometimes to access different markets. And this is part of our job. So we decided to organize this webinar because we think it is important to address maybe some views or some prejudice about China, and to try to support you as much as we can in your possible future ventures. Before we start, because I think we have a long run and a long webinar with a lot of topics to address, and we'd like to give you some time to ask your questions. I wanted to give a special thanks to Cedro, my colleague, which just started with us, but organized this webinar perfectly together with Davide. And we hope that this webinar will meet all your needs, and I'm sure it will. Thank you, Davide, and have a good session together with us.
Thank you very much, Alexis. I would like to also echo your words to stress that the Chinese biotech industry has been growing exponentially in the past few years. So we've decided to also to focus on this sector to make sure that there is the chance to understand how to approach this market, how to approach this sector in China, which we've also seen in the latest 5-year plan of May 2022, has also been stressed as a sector to be enhanced in China. So it is at the forefront, let's say, for what concerns also the attention in China itself. So it is relevant for us to better understand how to access it and what are the challenges that as European small and medium enterprises it is possible to face when considering this market. I would like to very quickly present EU SME Centre as one of the organizers of this event. We are a project funded by the European Union. This is currently the 14th year of life of this project. This was launched in 2010 and is currently being implemented by 4 consortium partners and 2 associated partners, both in Europe and in China. The goal of this project is that of supporting European small and medium enterprises that want to access the Chinese market and to do so free of charge for the enterprises. In order to achieve this goal, we've developed 5 main services. Of course, there's more to this, but you can learn more about us on our website. The first service that we offer is the self-diagnosis tool. The enterprise can directly access it through our website, and this tool is aimed at highlighting any potential knowledge gap that the enterprise might have for what concerns the Chinese market. Should there be anything that the enterprise is not aware of that they should know, the website redirects the user to the knowledge component. Here we have all of the documents that have been published by EU SME Centre in the past 14 years. It's more than 350 publications ranging from general descriptions of the Chinese market to very in-depth, very sector-specific assessments of the various sectors of the economy. Should that not suffice for the enterprise, there's the possibility to reach out to our experts through the advice function. Here, there's the possibility to pose directly questions that are relevant for your enterprise to our network of experts, both based in China and in Europe. The fourth service that we offer is the training one, such as the event that we are attending today. Here, we try to provide updates on the Chinese market, assessments of specific sectors of the market. So it is also a very relevant instrument to provide and shed a little bit more light about China. And the last service that we offer is the advocacy one, aimed at providing a hub for European enterprises to raise their concerns, to make sure that their voices are heard at the governmental level in China. So we act as a sort of collector of the issues that the European small and medium enterprises face. As Alexi was saying, long webinar, so I will stop my presentation here and leave the floor to Alessandra Capriglia from the China IP SME Helpdesk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Davide and Alexis, for co-organizing this event with us. It is always a pleasure to work with the EU SME Centre. Yes, my name is Alessandra Capriglia, Project Manager of the China IP SME Helpdesk, which in a nutshell is a EU-funded project providing first-line advice to SMEs from the European Union and from the Single Market Programme associated countries. We cover the 4 jurisdictions of China, so mainland Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, each of them having their own IP system, which is an important factor when considering internationalizing, exporting your products to China. The project exists for the last 15 years, and it has helped over 100,000 SMEs to date. The most important service is our helpline. SMEs can contact us at this email address. Please feel free to write it down, and also to our helpline phone number. We have a team in China who will respond to your inquiries within 3 working days. And it is, of course, free of charge, and it is confidential, aligned with GDPR regulations. Other services are, we organize training, workshops, and webinars, so both on-site trainings and webinars like this one, on either different IP issues or sector-focused topics. We can organize one-on-one consultation sessions with our IP business advisors. So on the website, you can find a little button that you can click, and you can schedule a meeting, 30 minutes to an hour meeting with our IP advisor, who is going to walk you through your IP strategy for the Chinese market. Or to respond to any issues you might have if you are already exporting to China. Feel free to go to our website and download free of charge all our materials. We have IP guides, fact sheets, infographics, as well as case studies, so real cases of SMEs who have had issues in the past and how we help them to tackle those issues. And we also have a blog where we collect articles written by our IP experts. These are examples of guides that we have that you can find on the website. So the IP fact sheets, if you're planning to export to mainland China, you can download this guide and you can have an overview of prices and procedures and different IP rights. You can find, for example, a guide for medical devices or for the pharmaceutical industry. The China IP SME Helpdesk is part of the big family of the International IP SME Helpdesk. So if you're looking also at other regions in the world, there are colleagues covering Latin America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and also the European region. We publish on the social media all our upcoming events and IP tips and curiosity. So feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and if you're already familiar with Chinese app, then you might have WeChat, and we're also there. Once again, feel free to contact us at any time. We'll respond within 3 working days. It's free and confidential. Now I give the floor back to Davide. I look forward to the presentation of our IP expert, Toby Mak, and do feel free to ask him any questions you may have. It's a real good opportunity to get his expertise. Thanks a lot, Davide. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. Before leaving the floor to our speakers today, I would just like to very briefly reiterate that this event is going to be divided in 2 main topics that we're going to tackle today. The first one is going to focus on the regulatory aspect of this market in China. The second one will be focused on the IPR component, so intellectual property rights. At the end of both keynote speeches, there will be a short Q&A session. So please do not hesitate to write down your question in the section inside the Zoom platform. We will try our best to reply to all of them. Should we not be able to find the time to reply to all of you, we will reach out to you through email in order to try and provide replies to your questions. So please do not hesitate to write any potential inquiries you might have. And so without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Hamish King, CEO at Cisema, which is a regulatory and compliance consultancy for China founded in Munich and Beijing in 2002. Mr. Hamish King is a lawyer by training, and he has now been leading the Cisema firm for 14 years already. So thank you very much for being here today, Hamish King, and we hope we will have an interesting amount of questions on this relevant presentation.
Great, thank you, Davide. Just to double check, yeah, you can hear me and see my screen okay, please, Davide?
Yeah, both of them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me for this presentation. I'm going to speak for around 50 minutes or 45 minutes or so, leaving some time for Q&A. But I would like to make it interactive if you know, of course, but it requires your involvement. So if you have specific questions as they come, as Davide mentioned, please do type them into the chat box, and I'll be very happy to use that as a guide to speak about what is most interesting or important for you. Otherwise, I have a number of slides, and if you'd like to receive a copy, please email me, or I understand that they may also be distributed afterwards by the EU SME team. I'm going to speak about the specific regulatory topics related to China, including some parts of Hong Kong approvals as well, over the next 50 minutes. What perspective am I bringing here? Davide introduced me briefly. I just also reiterate that I am a lawyer, certified and qualified to practice in Australia as well as in Hong Kong. But we're not giving legal advice here today. We're talking about the specific regulatory requirements for obtaining the marketing approvals for drugs and devices. A little bit about our company. We are a regulatory consultancy wholly focused on the China market. Most of our staff are Chinese, based in Beijing and a few other cities in mainland China. I'm talking to you today from Hong Kong. We also have a Munich office and various staff around Europe who speak your language, French, Spanish, German, and Italian, and many other languages. So if you prefer to speak in your language about how regulatory works in China, please get in touch. We cover various different sectors, but all focused on helping international companies enter, register, and comply with the China regulations. Here's a short agenda for our topics today. We're going to talk about the different types of registration pathways and how that is set up, first of all, by the qualification and classification of your product. What are those pathways in broad overview, followed by a bit more of a deep dive into the drugs area, including recent trends, timelines, and costs, followed by devices and IVD, trends, timelines, and costs. Some points around specific local agent requirements, as well as some alternative pathway in more detail, specifically Hong Kong registration or filing into the Greater Bay Area, which is the 80 million region that is southern China, and for which there is a relatively new Connect scheme that has opened. So this may be of interest as an alternative pathway to enter the market. Okay, then. So the first question, of course, is how is your product classified? Now, in some ways, this is a straightforward, simple question, but in other ways, it's not always. Specifically for software and those small, medium enterprise companies who are in product development are thinking about how in their development phase to appropriately fit their product to the market and fit that with the relevant regulatory approvals. There are some gray areas or boundaries, whether that's between device and pharmaceutical product, maybe a combination product, for example. Is it device-led or is it drug-led? Or even pharma and cosmetics. There is an increasing trend for cosmeceuticals or the like, botanicals. These kinds of products could be pharmaceutical product according to Chinese regulations, or they could be a cosmetics product. So this is always the first question, of course, to ask yourself as you're planning your China approvals and China market entry. Where does your product fit into this broad classification? Because this will be highly determinative about how long it takes for your product to enter the market, how substantial the evidence is that you require to do the approvals, prepare the dossier, and all the rest. Also, just a point to note that there are developing various master files for both drugs, the more standard, as you may be aware, API, excipient packaging master files, drug master files, as well as more recently medical device master files for specific components or other parts of medical devices. They themselves can seek specific medical device master file filings in China, which can enable you as a supplier manufacturer to therefore protect some confidential information vis-a-vis your customer who is the device manufacturer, and also help with the total overall dossier submission in getting it prepared quicker so that you can access the market quicker. I won't spend much more time on that part, but I just think it's worth mentioning. Health food and supplements is also a growing area in the Chinese market as globally. In fact, health foods are very strictly managed in China, and it can take a year or more to get a what might seem otherwise a simple product like even a vitamin C tablet or the like for sale in general trade. CCC is the final classification. This is China's CE mark equivalent. In fact, this used to be the certification for medical device, for active devices, until around 2014, when the regulations were substantially rewritten into the medical device specific regulations we have today, and that are far more strict as compared with the pre-2014 regulations. Prior to 2014, in fact, to get a medical device registration or even a drug registration in China for that matter, it was a relatively straightforward process that was mostly self-declarative, similar to the CE mark class 1 under MDD. But of course, since 2014 has become much more onerous, and partly that is a response to specific safety concerns in the market, as well as some other legislative drivers. So once you determine the classification, and we of course are focusing on device and drugs for the purposes of this presentation, what's the next step? We're talking about China, so that's where we're going to start before I talk about two alternatives, which are parts of China, have slightly different regulations, but the standard application to the National Medical Products Administration in Beijing is what 90% of drugs or devices will be exploring. For devices or IVDs, that means you first need your CE mark, your home country approval. You will also require a clinical evaluation report especially if it's a class 2 or 3 product, that's the higher risk. That is not just a translation of your Europe CER itself, needs to be written for the Chinese standards, which are different from international standards, harmonized standards. For pharmaceutical products, there are specific ethnicity requirements around your safety and efficacy profiles. So that's something to be thinking about when you are starting even your early phase trials, to consider. Are you looking at China as a phase 1 registration market? If so, you should be exploring multi-regional clinical trials with a China arm early in the process, or at the very least, identifying a subset of Chinese ethnic population in your trials done in Europe or elsewhere. At a recent conference I attended in Macau University with a number of academia, the head of AstraZeneca, for example, of AstraZeneca Hong Kong and Macau, talked about how for them, China is a wave 1 destination. So they will progress China, EU, and generally US, all as the wave 1 for their filings, registrations for marketing approval of drugs. Whereas Hong Kong, on the other hand, is a wave 3 or 4 destination, because Hong Kong requires another country's approval before you can obtain your drug registration in Hong Kong. There's some regulation, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which may change that situation. But at this stage, that's the lay of the land. Okay, what about alternatives? Everyone also always wants to know can you do it faster and cheaper, of course. Whilst there are some considerations around fast tracks, emergency approval, priority approval, conditional approvals. These tend to be for quite specific situations relating to specifically listed products. For example, urgently needed drugs or specifically listed pediatric indicated products. And I won't spend more time talking about those in this presentation, but if you'd like to know more, please get in touch. There is, however, and this is more device and IVD focused, an innovative device application, which enables you as a manufacturer to submit to the NMPA in Beijing, even without your home country approval. So you can start trying to register in Beijing for China-wide approvals at the same time as you go for your CE mark, if, most importantly, you have a China patent. And this is not always a straightforward thing to have right off the bat. So that's a very important prerequisite to ensure you have before you start submitting for the innovative approval, or at least have in progress before you start submitting. The other pathways I'd just like to mention are Hong Kong Listing Integrated Bay Area and Hainan Pilot Zone. First, Hong Kong. I'm sitting in Hong Kong today. Hong Kong has a different regulatory process for marketing approvals of drugs and devices as compared with mainland. In fact, registration of your device or IVD is voluntary. You can start selling your medical device or your IVD into Hong Kong tomorrow if you so desire. And if you can find a purchaser, private hospital purchaser who is interested. Public hospitals now generally will want to see the voluntary registration done but that still is not always the case. But there is certainly a mandated tender now. A mandated purchase tender requirement for listed devices or IVDs. Yeah, but for private hospitals, there's not. How do you go about getting this voluntary listing? I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the key point is that it's documentary. It can be done in English. It relies on your home country approval, your CE mark, whether it's a device or a drug for that matter. And the really interesting point is that it allows the registration into what we call the Connect scheme, the Greater Bay Area, which is the size of Germany, almost 80 million people in the Greater Bay Area region of southern China. It's also one of the richest areas of China. And if you have a Hong Kong approved product, drug, or device, then you can seek to sell into one of 19 hospitals at this stage in the GBA region, provided there's no similar product already sold in China itself. And this is also interesting, not only because it is generally a much faster process, but also it could allow you to gather real-world data on Chinese ethnicity, Chinese ethnic population, in order to support your eventual China-wide application, which you must still go through. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that later in the presentation too. Hainan Pilot Zone is the final alternative pathway. Hainan is China's Hawaii. It sits off the south coast of China. There's a specific zone, 10 by 10 kilometer zone or thereabouts, within the Hainan Island that has been set up as a dedicated space for medical tourism. This is a government policy trying to cater to wealthy Chinese who might otherwise travel overseas to Thailand, which is very common in Asia to travel for your medical procedures. Thailand or Australia or US or Europe for that matter. Instead, the policy is to try to have such world-class drugs and devices available in this pilot zone. There are around 10 or 12 hospitals within this zone. Each is really a mega department, and the hospitals within this zone can lead or sponsor an approval by the Hainan MPA or regulatory authority, which will allow you to sell and obtain revenues in China mainland in the Hainan pilot zone before you have the China-wide approvals. As with Hong Kong into GBA, this can help not only educate your KOLs in China, you can invite them to come use your product. It can also help to gather real-world data on your product's use on Chinese ethnic population, which can therefore shorten some approval times for China NMPA, because you still have to go to the Beijing NMPA for China-wide approvals. Okay, so that's the broad picture. We have the standard National Medical Products Administration application. That's what we're going to spend most of our time on, because that is the most relevant application for most. Then there are some emergency priority review approvals, innovative approvals, which largely mirror the standard procedure, but have some faster review times and some special conditions, which I've mentioned. And then there's the alternatives, Hong Kong into GBA and Hainan. We won't talk about Hainan further. If you'd like more info, let me know. I will touch on Hong Kong into GBA a little bit further later in the presentation. Okay, first we're going to talk about some regulatory trends in China drug registrations, and then we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the regulatory considerations for a marketing approval of a drug in China. Every year, the China CDE or the Drug Evaluation Department of the NMPA issues an annual report which summarizes its work. It's a work report about number of applications and other similar data for the prior year. I've set out in the following slide, this slide and some of the following slides, some of the interesting and key data. If you'd like a copy of that report, you can also find it on a website, or please email me and I can forward you a copy of an English translation. Drug, as you can see here, there's a chart showing the drug applications requiring technical review by type of application. There was a certain lull in activity, which you can notice in 2022, followed by an acceleration in 2023. Part of that was due to COVID. As you may be aware, in China, COVID hit a little bit different in 2020, 2021. There wasn't so much effect, whereas 2022 was when there was very strict lockdowns. But that has largely rebounded in 2023, and we expect it to have rebounded further in 2024. But this report won't be issued until February or March of next year. INDs, confirmatory clinical trials, NDAs, these are all shown on the slide here. It was only really the ANDAs that didn't take a hit. This is another graph which shows that pretty much everything in 2023 has accelerated again regarding drug applications requiring technical review. Again, CDE is the review department of NMPA, which accepts and reviews marketing authorization applications for pharmaceutical products in China. There were around, or a little over 1,300 IND applications, 47 innovator chemical drugs in 2023. This was up 30% on the prior year. There were 410 IND applications, up 45% on the prior year, 79 NDAs for innovative chemical drugs, and 72 for improved new chemical drugs, as well as 98 NDAs for class 5.1 chemical drugs, which is the imported pharmaceutical products. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly too. This chart shows the drug registration applications actually completed over the prior years. Green shows 2019, blue 2020, orange 2021, red 2022, and purple 2023. And again, you can see that 2023 shows the reversion to the strong previous uptrend. You can read some of the detail of the slides at your leisure, but in broad terms, the three categories of drugs in China: traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, chemical drugs, and biologics, all showed increase. Chemical drugs, as you can see, are the vast amount of applications in at China's CDE. There's also a trend of a more communicative regulatory authority in China. There are more and more well, not necessarily face-to-face, but at least video meetings or calls or video conferences, as well as increasingly face-to-face meetings. There were around 5,900 applications for communication in 2023, which was up 20% year over year. And the source is linked on this slide. The final highlight area I'll mention relates to chemical drug NDAs for approval. In green, you can see that our innovative drugs, blue are chemical drugs, and orange are for class 5.1 chemical drugs. That's drugs already marketed elsewhere in the world, but not in China. And again, there's a strong uptrend year over year. If you are interested in receiving after this webinar some more information, there is a specific list issued by China for urgently needed drugs, as well as pediatric drugs encouraged for development and marketing authorization. And please get in touch if you'd like a copy. Okay, what does the framework look like for drugs in China? I've mentioned or thrown out some names already, but just to recap, the regulatory authority responsible for drug approvals in China is the National Medical Products Administration, or NMPA, also known previously as the CFDA or China FDA, but changed its name in 2018. And it's the Center for for Drug Evaluation, which manages the specific approvals and reviews. There are provincial medical products administrations as well, which have some responsibilities, especially for audit work. And there's insurance bureaus as well at a provincial level, in addition to the National Health Commission, which relates to policy development and other basic health provisions. We won't go into much more detail, but this is just to give you the broad picture. From a regulatory approval perspective, the key department is really the CDE of NMPA, as well as some of its affiliate organizations that deal with testing, NIFDC, for example, or pharmacopoeia, for example, the CPC. And what are the categories of drugs in China? There are, as I mentioned, chemical, traditional Chinese medicine, and biologics. I won't say more about traditional Chinese medicines. Chemical drugs and biologics themselves are divided into further subclasses, depending on whether they innovative drugs have been used in China or elsewhere in the world or not. And as you can see here on the slide, new drugs are classes 1, 2, and 5.1, while generics are class 5.2, as well as 3 and 4. Classes 3 and 4 are manufactured in China, so we won't talk more about those. We're talking about imported products, which are class 5.2 for generics. That is generic drugs marketed in other countries, but not yet in China. Or classes 1, 2, and 5.1, they're innovative drugs not marketed anywhere in the world. Or class 2, improved new drugs not marked anywhere in the world. Example, a new dosage form, a new indication. Whilst 5.1 is new drugs that have been marketed in other countries, but not yet in China. For a biologic, there are similar class divisions. I won't go into detail about it. You can read those at your leisure, but it depends again on whether it's marketed in China yet or not, and whether it is related to applying in China or not, prevention, treatment, or IVD managed as biologics. Briefly about drug master files for APIs, excipients, and packaging. If you as a manufacturer manufacture one of these products, then there is a specific master files available. The process takes between 6 months and 2 years, because the product will be bound with the drug end product itself. But it's important to be aware that you can make a specific application, and in many cases are required to do so, for a master file that will protect your confidential information and will also speed up the approval of the final end drug product. Just so you're aware, there's an online platform which sets out much of this information. And here's a brief snapshot on the slide. You can also follow the link, excuse me, if that's of interest. To give broad ideas, the number of APIs filed so far are a little over 16,500, whilst 12,500 are active API substances. It may be that one API is bound to more than one drug, of course. You can see that there are various public information available on this online platform, and you can access it and search it at your leisure. Sometimes you can play around with the Google Translate or similar translation product to work it, but it can also be a little bit clunky. So ideally, you can access it in Chinese, although I understand that's not always feasible. If you have any specific questions about an API that is filed or not, or an excipient or packaging for that matter, or a drug, then please let me know, and I can ask our experts to help you out. So with that, I'm not going to go into more detail about the drugs process. I'm going to move more to medical device and IVDs in the time remaining. We still have plenty to talk about. We will bring in drugs again when we talk about Hong Kong in the last minutes of my presentation. But now we're talking about some trends for devices and IVDs over the last years. The NMPA in Beijing handles all domestic class 3 and overseas medical device and IVD applications. Domestic class 2 and 1 are handled at a provincial level. All products, that is domestic manufactured and international products, are bound or to follow the same requirements. However, at a practical level, because domestic products class 2 and 1 go to the provincial MPA, this often will lead to reduced application fees, as well as some faster approval times. So that's something to be aware of when we're talking about localization of manufacturing, which has been some trends in China, is that there can be some benefits if you're a lower risk product to having a localized manufacturing. On the other hand, there is still a strong demand, I would reiterate, for imported products and for international products. A Chinese patient, just as a German or an Italian patient, they are interested in receiving world-class and top products made in Germany, made in France, made in Italy. And so that's a strong attraction. The number of approvals has been increasing over the prior years. Again, 2022 saw a drop primarily due to the COVID lockdown in China, but 2023 has rebounded strongly. So to return to risk classification, we talked about qualification, classification at the start of the session. Risk classification for devices is a little bit different to international jurisdictions. Your CE mark may not map clearly to a class 1, 2, or 3 classification in China. In fact, China often is more conservative than other jurisdictions, so don't be surprised if your product is up classified. There is a classification catalog, and that's how you first check your risk class. It is a long list published multiple times over a number of years, which includes detailed information, pictures, and similar, showing what type of product goes into which risk class and how it should be handled. If you'd like your product checked for its risk classification, please let me know. We can do that quickly with your product IFU. If it's still unclear after checking the classification catalog, then there are certain rules that can be applied. But in such cases, we would generally recommend to make a formal application to the NMPA in Beijing for a ruling as to the appropriate risk class. What are the implications of that ruling or that classification? Class 1 go through a filing process. It's more like a 2 to 4 month process that requires a local agent still in China, but otherwise is document based. It has some requirements relating to technical requirements, which is the appendix to a certificate that sets out certain parameters that will be important for your sales. More about that shortly, as well as some notarization and similar requirements. The certificate can then be picked up promptly once the filing is done and made, and then there is a review in parallel, and such certificates are valid indefinitely. Class 2 and 3 products, on the other hand, have a 5-year expiry, and the process for registration, not filing, registration for Class 2 and 3 is more like a 1.5 to 2 year process, which I'll set out shortly here. First, there's a document collection process, followed by a PTR, product technical requirements writing, that takes around a month in our experience. This PTR document is very important, although part of Class 1 filings as well. For Class 2, it's even more important because it sets out the parameters along which you need to do your testing, your local testing in China, which is quite a China-specific requirement. The PTR is also appended to the final certificate and is equally as important as the final NMPA certificate, and hospitals or other purchasers, distributors will often want to see that PTR as part of their purchase decision. Once you have this written, you will send your samples to China so that they can undergo testing in China at an NMPA certified test lab. That testing process is practically a relatively what should be straightforward but can be difficult in practice process. And for our customers, we have test engineers who are located in the test labs every day helping with those test items to ensure that they are appropriately done, because otherwise it may be that your product has questions from the relevant test engineer and it will then go to the back of the queue until that response is received, if not received promptly, which means that it can take another month or 2 or more before your product comes back to the front of the queue, does testing, has another issue, goes back. So you can see how this process can take very long and be a key timing item. So if time to market is important to you, as it is to most companies, then handle your type testing process very closely. The other key document, assuming no clinical trials are required, is the clinical evaluation report. This is a document that is specific to China regulations and requirements and guidelines and needs to be written with that in mind. It is not simply a translation of your CE mark, CER. It needs to be adapted very specifically to the China market. That document takes generally 4 months or so to write in our experience. The rest of the process will look much like other jurisdictions. There's a preparation of the dossier stage, followed finally by the submission to NMPA. This is when the application fee will need to be paid. There's a 60-day review time for Class 2 or 90-day for Class 3, following which a supplementary notice will be issued by NMPA, asking further questions about the product, seeking clarifications, and so on. You have 1 year to respond to that supplementary notice. And the clock doesn't stop if you make questions or submissions in the interim. So that's quite a ticking timeline to be aware of. When you do submit for the supplementary notice responses, you will have a final evaluation by NMPA, following which there is an administrative approval and certificate issuance. And total timeline looks roughly 1.5 years for Class 2 and 21 months for Class 3. So I kind of glanced over clinical trials for devices and IVDs, but I'll just touch on that again briefly. I've set out here a decision tree to think about whether a clinical trial or not is required in China, more specifically for medical devices. And you can follow through this at your leisure to check for your product. The key first question is it high risk or not? If yes, then a clinical trial in China is highly likely. And I should add, of course, first of all, that Class 2 and 3 products by default will all require a clinical trial data supporting their application in China, unless there are one of these exemptions apply. That is an exemption list. There's a specific list of products that don't need clinical trials, unless there's overseas clinical trial data already. Maybe you've done a trial in Spain or elsewhere. That data will likely be sufficient. Or unless there is a predicate device already registered in China that is similar or same as your product and has a similar safety and efficacy profile. This is somewhat analogous to the 510K pathway, although it tends to be a little more difficult to gather the predicate data in our experience, because it's often quite detailed data, which may well be confidential. And if it's a competitor product, which is most likely, that can be hard to obtain, which is what the final question here is trying to get at. We like to think about this as a feasibility question. Is it feasible to write a clinical evaluation report instead of undergoing a clinical trial in China? So this is an analysis that it's worthwhile doing upfront at the start, before you even press go on testing samples and all the rest, so that you are clear about the pathway, the timeline, the costs, and all the rest. Speaking of which, what are the costs? What are those broad costs looking like? The application fee for Class 1 is there is no application fee. In fact, for Class 2 and Class 3, it is more like 30,000 euros, or as I have here, 40,000 or 45,000 AUD. For Class 3, it's around 40,000 euros for the application fee. But there are substantial other costs, including type tests. I mentioned the type tests, importation fees, customs clearance, notarization, and translation costs, because all documents must be submitted in Chinese language. So in total, we generally guide to around 100,000 euros for a Class 2 product, including type tests, application fee, all other external costs, with around 1/3 being application fee, 1/3 being other external costs, and 1/3 being your consultants' fees for CER writing or the like. Class 3 product is more like 150,000 euros ballpark full cost figure, full cost, very important to emphasize. And timeline, as I mentioned, around 4 months for Class 1, 18 months for Class 2, and 21 months for Class 3. The last key topic to mention before we move to talk about Hong Kong in the final 5 minutes before questions is the local agent requirement. For China submissions, you must make such dossier submissions with an NMPA legal agent or authorized rep, as it's known in Europe. There are 3 broad options for this local rep. The first is a distributor, which tends to be the default for many companies. The second is your own subsidiary. For a multinational, this is, of course, the more common option, and a third-party agent is your final option. The distributor option tends to be the default, as I mentioned. We caution our customers about selecting this route because that distributor will view very detailed information about your product, manufacturing process, supplier information, and the like. And many distributors in China are also manufacturers in their own right. So it has been known that there have been copycat products found down the street from a distributor local agent. And so this is something just to be cautious about. There are many very positive distributor relationships, of course, where they act in this local agent role, but it's something to be wary about as part of your IP risks, which we'll hear a bit more about shortly with your China strategy. Having an own subsidiary is the other option. There are more substantial costs to set up such China wholly foreign enterprise. And there's a timing element as well, because you need to have some regulatory staff, you need to have some substance for the market. And third option is a third-party agent. In fact, Cisema acts in this role for many customers, where we don't have the same conflicts as a distributor might. And it also allows you to appoint more than one distributor, for example, because the agent needs to be involved with the first import of the product for each distributor. Or for each port. So this allows you increased flexibility and increased coverage to get the volumes that are expected for such a large market. Okay, so in the final few minutes, I'm just going to touch on briefly again the Hong Kong listing to Greater Bay Area alternative pathway, because this may be of interest to some of you. First, to remind that Hong Kong itself is a city that is nearly as large as Switzerland, has 7.5 million people. There are around 43 public hospitals with 13 private hospitals. On the other hand, there is the Greater Bay Area region, of which Hong Kong and Macau are part. The Greater Bay Area region has over 80 million people. That's 80 million. That's the size of Germany, almost larger than the UK. There is a recent Connect scheme which has developed, which allows such Hong Kong registered drugs or devices to apply to sell into one of 19 hospitals in the GBA region. So far, there have been 56 medical devices and drugs in total approved for sale into the GBA Connect scheme via this urgently needed pathway. And that's as of a few months ago. What does this Hong Kong listing or registration process look like? Here's a little bit more detail, but as I mentioned, for devices or IVDs, it's voluntary to get your product registered in Hong Kong. You can start selling tomorrow if you would like to. There is no need to get your product, your device or IVD registered in Hong Kong before you start selling it to private hospitals. However, for public hospitals, there is now a requirement to prefer products that are already registered or listed. And in fact, very recently, Hong Kong has announced that it is introducing a new regime, which will soon, rather than rely on third-party registrations or rather registrations in other countries, it wants to try to develop its own registration system, but that's still to be formulated. All the more reason to try to get your product registered voluntarily sooner. For drugs, on the other hand, there is a requirement for registration. This is a document-based process. It takes 6 to 12 months in our experience, sometimes longer for new chemical entities. It requires at least one CPP, one approval from elsewhere in the world. You need a local responsible person or local agent in Hong Kong in order to make the application, but otherwise it is a document-based process. So here are some products that have been approved so far via this Connect scheme, which I earlier have mentioned. After the product's been approved in Hong Kong, then it can seek to enter the GBA market itself in one of 19 hospitals. There's some orthopedic implant products, pacemakers and IVD test kits, as well as some catheters and other innovative products. These are all products that don't have similar products already approved in China. They need not be state-of-the-art products, but they need to have some, first of all, demand from one of these hospitals themselves, because it is the hospital, one of these 19 hospitals listed, and I can share the list if you prefer, that drive registration into the Connect scheme. What might that China registration through GBA pathway look like? I've just set out one idea here on the slide for you to think about. You start first with your Hong Kong listing, which takes 6 to 12 months for a drug or a device. Then, and in parallel, as the registration comes close to being completed, you start seeking connections and networks and sales into one of these 19 GBA hospitals. The key driver is the procurement department of those hospitals, because it's the procurement department which will then encourage the hospital themselves to sponsor such GBA application to the Guangdong MPA, the provincial MPA. In parallel, you can also make a regulatory submission, which is called a pre-filing to the Guangdong MPA. And this will also help with your discussions with the hospital, because you can say, hey, you don't need to worry about the regulatory submission part. I've already done most of that. You just need to want the product, and then we can sell it to you. and the reason that's a key, the hospital wanting it is key to satisfying the urgently needed part. We've heard from the regulatory authority, the Guangdong MPA itself. In a recent roundtable I attended in Guangdong, the authority said, look, to satisfy this requirement, if the hospital comes to us and says they need the product and they can't find it elsewhere in China, then that will generally be enough for us to make the Connect scheme approvals, provided all the other conditions are satisfied, like sales into Hong Kong hospital already, Hong Kong approvals and the like. So after you get this GBA approval, what's the next step? Then you can start gathering real-world data on Chinese ethnic population in China mainland itself. This can support and reduce potential trial numbers that would otherwise be needed for your China mainland application, which you must still go through. So in total, this timeline will be longer than if you just simply went straight for an MPA in Beijing, but it does have a step process which may allow you to get revenues along the way, to educate certain KOLs, and to gather data that you might not otherwise have, that might otherwise require a China clinical trial. So with that, my final summary is I encourage you to, as always, start your feasibility discussions early, to think about your qualification, your classification of product, understand the relevant testing requirements that may be relevant for your device, for your drug, or IVD. Don't treat China just like another export market. Don't treat it like if it's not your US or Europe market, then you just find a distributor and let them manage all the regulatory. I'd encourage you to think carefully about managing that regulatory process yourself with a third party or with the appropriate team in-house. And don't rely on your distributor only, because you need to provide substantial information as part of the dossier submission, which that local agent must handle and must submit. And finally, China approvals are realistic and achievable. That's also a key message. We are helping companies do this every day. A year and a half is not so dissimilar to an MDR approval or a US FDA approval for that matter. Yes, it comes later in the process because you first need your home country approval. But in terms of a staggered or global rollout, it's something to closely consider and plan for. And with that, I've just put some information here about where you can find us. We're at various events. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter to stay abreast of regulatory matters. There are white papers, and of course, via EU SME itself. As Davide earlier showed, there's a wealth of information. Okay, and with that, are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Hamish. I see that we have a couple of questions in the Q&A section inside the platform. The first one is very specific. Do you happen to know if a psoriasis cream could be considered a medical device in China?
So such a cream for a specific indication is more likely to be a pharmaceutical product at first glance. It could also be, because it has topical indications only, it could possibly be a medical device or even a cosmetic for that matter, dependent on the formula and the claims on the packaging. But that's something that my expert team can quickly identify and conclude on with the appropriate packaging and formula information for the cream itself.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Then we have a question pertaining to the easy of access, let's say. We've been asked if it's actually easier to import into the Chinese market medical devices rather than drugs as a general category. I think this is kind of...
So just say that again. Are devices or drugs easier to enter? Is that the question?
Yeah. The question is if the actual medical devices are easier to import than the actual drugs.
Yeah, I mean, it's all. I guess in some, a device is easier to get a registration for, in terms of total timeline from a standard process. But yeah, I mean, you might compare it similarly to Europe, where it's a device versus a drug. What's quicker to get to market? Having said that, if you have a drug which already has sufficient data, then it may be just that you can go through the relevant marketing approval application, and that could potentially be quicker than a high-risk medical device that needs a clinical trial in China. So it's always a comparison, and it's hard to generalize too much.
Yeah, that's clear. And we also have a request for a little bit of deepening and further explaining the Hainan Boa route. I think the last slides that the discussion about the Greater Bay Area, about the Hainan geographical area, have piqued the interest of the attendees.
Yes, and I didn't have time to go into that in detail, but if you'd like more information, I think it's Charlotte, then please let me know. That is somewhat analogous to the GBA application pathway. You need to identify one of these 12 hospitals who want to purchase your product. They will then sponsor, so to speak, the application to the Hainan MPA authority, who then can go through the approvals, which takes a matter of months. If you have all the documentation in order, that will allow you to sell into this 10 by 10 kilometer zone in Hainan Island. And that will allow you again to get not only revenues, but also real world data on Chinese ethnic population that can therefore reduce the clinical trial requirements in China mainland when you go to NMPA, because, excuse me, you still need to go to NMPA to get China-wide approvals. It's like saying, okay, can we sell into Brussels? Yes, because there's a specific policy need to have certain drugs which are otherwise only accessible in the US or Australia or elsewhere. So it's a similar sort of concept, which might be a bit strange, but there's a carve out, so to speak, for this one pilot zone, just as there is a carve out for GBA, provided you satisfy the relevant conditions.
Thank you very much.
So David, I see that there's one other question here about foreign companies in the market. I think we should, we shouldn't shy away from, some political considerations, and there are, of course, policies relating to localization or preferring China-made products, which have been introduced for public hospital procurement tenders. However, that is very much focused on the sort of low-value consumables, products that are unlikely to be manufactured and sold by importing companies to China. At the higher tech end of the market, that is really where European innovative companies are competing, and it's those products which are really still in demand by Chinese patients, just as they are globally. Site inspections itself, that is not relevant. There isn't a need for a site inspection as part of an NMPA application for a device. For drug, it is not necessarily required either. It depends on the application and how high risk the drug is seen as part of your NMPA marketing approvals. So I don't think actually site inspections has much relevance to a marketing approval submission.
Perfect. Then we also have a couple of questions for clarification. The first one pertains to the fact that drug approval in China does not require home country approval, and we're asked if this statement is correct. So if that's true.
Do not require home country approval. They do require home country approval generally. Yes, it depends on the submission you make. If you apply for, I talked about AstraZeneca doing it. If you apply as under class 5.2, then that's a drug that is already approved elsewhere in the world, but not in China. Then you go through a certain pathway. If you're applying for as an innovative drug which is not approved anywhere else in the world, then yes, you're right. You don't need a China approval before you make these submissions.
And then following up on the same question, well, this is I let you read it because it's a bit more of a long-winded question. So I think it's best if you have the chance to take a look at that. But
yeah,
overall,
I'm just seeing the Q&A box now. So it's about centralized procurement and whether this makes it more difficult for foreign firms to access the Chinese market. As everywhere in the world, healthcare costs are ever spiraling, and so the Chinese government has tried to address this by introducing a more centralized procurement. This has primarily been targeted at the middleman. So there are often 2, 3, 4, 5 distributor levels in China before you get from the manufacturer to the actual hospital sale or purchase. And so therefore there's been a lot of margin and far higher prices received by such hospital procurement departments than might otherwise be the case. And of course, the government is trying to reduce those costs as well as its own costs in its huge China-wide insurance scheme. So such volume-based procurements or centralized procurements are trying to compensate a reduction in price for an increase in volume. And we have seen international companies compete in such centralized procurement submissions and win in those submissions. And they've found that despite that reduction in price, the increase in volume has made up for it. That's not to say that there isn't therefore a general reduction in pricing for a number of products. And if such products, as I mentioned, often low value consumables, although it's not just that, and the the general trend is to try to increase more centralized procurements, then it is a consideration. And one way to think about that from your regulatory perspective is to look at a innovative application. That was one of the points in my four pathways. An innovative designation, if you obtain this green channel approval, then you can sit outside such volume-based procurement, and you're not subject to such tenders. So that's something to consider as part of your rollout.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think we should have finished for now with the Q&A, and just double checking that we have not neglected any question.
There's one very helpful clarification around Boao Licheng pilot zone. There are, I said 12, thank you for correcting me, there are 23. So it's double the number that I mentioned, and that's important to note. Yes, it's a small zone, but there is a very substantial medical tourism area that is being built and that is being encouraged to capture this medical tourism. So yeah, thank you for the clarification. And I'm very conscious of time, but yeah, there is one more question.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly.
Are traditional medical treatments needing registration? Yes, they are. So I'm sorry if my slides weren't clear on that. I just did not address it in detail here. Traditional Chinese medicines is what I'm assuming you refer to, have their own specific registration process. And I can talk more about that another time, or Miriam, if you have more questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much, Davide, and I don't want to take up any more time here.
No, actually, thank you very much for picking that last question up. I missed it at the beginning. I think it was an extremely informative session. Thank you very much, Hamish, for the presentation. Of course, if any of the attendees has any additional questions, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. We will try to provide satisfactory answers to your questions. We can put you into contact with Hamish King from Cisema. Should you need that, should you require that. So do not shy away. If you need any additional information, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. So with that being said, I would like to once again thank you very much, Hamish King, for your presentation today. It was a pleasure having you here. And I would like, on the other hand, to invite to the floor Mr. Toby Mak, patent attorney and expert at the China IP SME Helpdesk. He served as co-chair of the Authorised IP practice in China committee and the IP practice in the Far East committee. He's also currently vice chair of the Asian practice committee of the IPO and a member of the membership committee of the IPO. Of course, we're going to focus currently also on the IP aspect of importing such items such as medical devices in China, which is a major component that European enterprises should take into account. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to you, Toby. Thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you, David, for the introduction. And now let me share the screen. Well, thank you, David, for the introduction. My name is Toby Mak, and other than that, I was born and educated in Hong Kong, and I'm still living in Hong Kong. So Hamish, we can come out and catch up when I'm back to Hong Kong next week. As David said, I do a lot of work for two IP organizations. They are the AIPLA, American Intellectual Property Law Association, and IPO, Intellectual Property Owners Association. So these are the topics that I will go through today. They include doing business now all involve IP, the patent trends worldwide and China, and about different kinds of IP protection offered in China. But there's a big catch, which we'll discuss later. And we will then talk about the time and cost to procure a Chinese invention patent and how to work with your patent attorney. This is important because, as Hamish said, there could be various difficulties for you to work with Chinese distributors. And in order to get your distributor to be under control, getting your IP in China can be vital. So let's first start with the first topic about doing business now or involve IP. The examples here, unfortunately, do not match very well with pharmaceuticals, but I believe you can get an idea from there. This is about what Apple does, and Apple businesses could be protected by at least 3 different kinds of IP. They include intellectual property, they include patents, trademark, which is in the middle that we always see the Apple logo, and designs. You may say that, okay, I understand that patents is highly relevant to me because it could direct to the active ingredient of my pharmaceutical, my formulation, my method and manufacturing, and so on. And for trademark, it could be directed to the name of my drug, which could be important for to protect my sales, like the trademark Viagra or Pfizer. But what about design? Well, that could be the shape of the drug could have a specific design that is distinguishable from other similar products, or even with color combination. Or it is the same for medical devices. And that is why design could become important for your pharmaceutical businesses. So let's now talk about some patent trends. For worldwide, basically there are 2 trends. It's continue to file, no matter in what technical industry, and continue to file more and more. And in economic downturn, that's my personal observation, there are more contentions. That is, there are more litigations going on with respect to intellectual property. Why is that? Because as economic downturn, people are more cautious about protecting their own territory. And when IP, no matter it's patent, trademark, or designs, comes into play, that could be an available tool to protect your own territory, they would be used. And for China, there's a recent adaptations. The recent trends happened in the last 3 years. They include adaptations of the US practice. Like, for example, China introduced the patent term adjustment that could give a patent with a longer term than the normal 20 years. And they introduced the drug patent term extension as in the US, and also the drug patent linkage system as in the US. The other trend is there tends to be higher compensation from infringement, particularly from patent infringement. If you sue in China, you can expect to get a higher compensation than 10 years ago. Another trend is there are measures given by China for easier to prove infringement, which makes things a lot easier than before. And there are additional measures imposed by China, which is quite recent, in January of 2024, making patent examiners more difficult to object a patent application. However, there are other catches that I will discuss later. The final trend is announced by the CNIPA. Subsidies for patent filing and for patent grants should disappear by 2025. However, there seems to be some disobedience from local provinces or cities against this disappearance of the subsidies. So let's move to the next topic. Is China offers many kinds of IP protection. As in all other places, China offers mainly these 4 types of protection: trademark, copyright, patent, which also includes designs, and trade secret. Whether registration is required or not, it depends on the different types. Like trademark, you could rely on non-registered trademark, but you will find it is extremely difficult for you to prove your ownership and for you to prove the establishment and the fame of non-registered trademark. Because for the system in China, they put heavy reliance on official records to prove the ownership of particularly intellectual property. So if you choose not to register your trademark, good luck trying to enforce that. Same for copyright. However, for patents, there is only one way to get patents, which is by formal registration. And for trade secret, by definition, there's no registration required. And what exactly are these four types of intellectual property protect? They're in the scope that I would not go through. That I would not go into the details. If you have further questions on what's the difference between each of them, please let me know. But in general, for a pharmaceutical business, patent is the key. It is unlikely that we could rely on copyright to protect a pharmaceutical or a medical device. And as I said, unregistered rights are difficult to prove and enforce in China. And there's one more thing that is very important. Registered rights are territorial. What does that mean? That means an EP patent has no enforcement effect in China and vice versa. And the US patent has no enforcement effect in China. We need to obtain separate patent registrations in China in order to protect your patent rights. And for patents, there are in fact 3 types of patents in China. They include invention patent, which is equivalent to the traditional European patent. And it protects technical solution in the form of apparatus and/or method. And this also protects chemicals and biologics. The term of invention patent is 20 years from the filing date, but because of the introduction of the patent term adjustment and drug patent term extension, the term could be longer than 20 years from the filing date. Substantive examination is required for invention patent, and we will go through what substantive examination means later. For utility model, they are directed to technical solution only in the form of improvement on shape and or structure, and only for devices. And chemical structure is not considered as improvement on shape and or structure. The term of the utility model is only 10 years from the filing date, but the good thing is it does not require substantive examination. For designs, it protects the look of a product. As I said before, if your medical devices has a very special shape and or color combination, or even with the drug pills having this special aesthetic features, then design protection may be sought. And the term of design is now 15 years from the filing date, and substantive examination is not required. So remember one thing is utility model generally is not suitable for biotech and pharmaceutical businesses. And for design, there is one thing that I want to mention is there is one specific type of infringement in China, which makes design and trademark more useful, sometimes maybe even than invention patent, is that there are just fake products around the corner everywhere. Those fake products would look exactly the same as your original product, but they simply do not work. What does that mean? That means if you have an invention patent, you could not target such fake products. Why? Because they do not work. And by definition, they must lack one or two features of the claim of the invention patent, which then makes them not infringing. However, because they look exactly the same as your original product, even bearing your trademark, that's why you may be able to catch them with designs and trademark easier. Now we go to talk about the time and cost to obtain a Chinese invention patent, because after all, that's the most important IP tool for bio and pharmaceutical companies. The time is generally required is about 2.5 years from 2.5 to 6 years from the first priority date. The first priority date is the date of your first application file. Since you are all European companies, that would be your European patent application date. This timeline could be accelerated by paying some fees earlier and or by filing a PPH request. A PPH stands for Patent Prosecution Highway. It is based on a patent granted elsewhere to accelerate the examination in China. And for the filing cost, for an English, because for any patent application filed in China, it must be filed in Chinese, same as the drug marketing approval issues, as Hamish has mentioned earlier. So we have to do a translation. And because the European application most of the time will be filed in English, depends on the jurisdiction, you may file it in French or German. So I would just use an English specification as an example. So for an English specification having 20 pages, each page with about 320 words and 20 claims, the total filing costs are about 2,350 euros, but it does not end there. During examination, we have to respond to an offer section, and further costs will be incurred. And for the flowchart and for the processes involved, we will come to this later in the further slide. And let's talk about how to work with your patent attorney. It is not only me, but your European patent attorney also. But first start with how a patent is useful to a company. No matter it is pharmaceutical company or biotech company or even an electronics company. A patent is useful in several ways, mainly two ways. First, it is for defensive purpose. It could be used to deter your client from using other suppliers because you have patent protection. If your client uses different suppliers, then by definition, not only the suppliers, but your client are infringing your patents. So another use is being used as a chips for negotiation. No matter it is in light of infringement claim from another party, or when during commercial negotiations. So for example, when one is being sued for infringement, if you have a patent that would cover your competitor's product, it could be used to counter sue and then reach for settlement at a much lower cost and much easier way. And finally, you could obtain license fees by using your patents. Others may be interested to use your technologies covered by your patents, and they may come to you and pay you a license fee for it. The offensive purpose is, of course, to sue for infringement to stop competition, or to force the other side to give you license fee. And of course, after such infringement litigation, you can obtain compensation. In China, fortunately, the compensation is a lot less attractive as in the US. In order to achieve any of these purposes, a valid patent must be first obtained, but the scope of this valid patent must be as broad as possible, but still maintain the validity. So what does a patent attorney do? That's what we do, including myself or all patent attorneys around the world. For example, for those in Europe, the first thing they have to do is to draft a patent specification. This document is the legal definition of your invention. And the same patent specification will be used to file in various jurisdictions around the world. And that is why I said the patent specification determines the fate of all applications worldwide. And good drafting needs sufficient communication with the inventors. And the patent attorney has to ask appropriate questions, like in the pharmaceutical space. What do we need? According to my own practice and my experience in the last 20 years, I find Chinese examiners are extremely demanding on sufficient data in a patent specification in order to get a patent granted. Otherwise, what I see is a lot of times people do not have, even if they have the patent granted elsewhere, granted in Europe, granted in Japan, granted in US, they could not get it granted in China, or even if granted with very limited scope. Most of the time, they can only direct it to the species, to the chemical or the biologics that have experimental data contained within the patent specification. So these are the questions that the patent attorney should be aware of and help you to get through when they draft the patent specification. Then after the specification is drafted, then we have to file. And our terms is to prosecute the patent application to grant. The processes will be described in the next slide. After your application is granted, if you find someone is infringing your patents, then a patent attorney is responsible to carry out the infringement analysis. That is to provide specific reasons and understanding analysis to say that why your patent is infringed. Just your word that a patent is infringed is not enough for a court to accept your infringement claim. We have to provide detailed analysis and reasons why the infringing products fall within the scope of your claim and infringing. Another thing that we do is we do freedom to operate opinion. One thing that is there's a big misunderstanding is that you own a patent, but it could not prevent you from infringing others' rights. And your patent does not give you any rights to sell the products. Like, for example, you may have 10 products, you may have 10 patents covering your drugs. But if you do not obtain the approval from the Chinese NMPA, you still could not sell your drugs in China. That's one example. And we, as a patent attorney, we are also responsible for advising to get around patents. Like, for example, if you see a big pharma company, they have a formulation patent that has not expired, but the active ingredient has its patent expired. We, patent attorney, could help you to try to think of ways to get around the patent. And of course, we also do work for suing for infringement and coordinate all of the above for worldwide operations. So exactly what is going on when we apply for a patent? Now, we first start with filing the application. Then after the application is filed, it will go through in China a so-called preliminary examination. That is a formality examination that the examiner will look, okay, whether you have filed the sufficient documents, you have filed, for example, a power of attorney, whether the figures could be read clearly without any fussiness and so on. If things goes right, then your application will be first published. And in parallel, we have to file a so-called request for examination. This request for examination has to be filed within 3 years from the earliest priority date. If the request for examination is not filed, then your application is considered to have been abandoned. So assuming that you file the request for examination, then it will go into the examination. And this is a specific term in our field. The examiner would issue an office action. What the examiner would do before issuing this office action, which is in essence an examination report, the examiner will first do a patent search to find patent documents published before your earliest priority date, and then use these documents to evaluate whether your application is fulfill the patentability requirement. There are basically 4 major requirements. One is novel. Your invention has to be new over anything available in the world before your priority date. Second, it has to be inventive, which means it could not be a trivial or an unimportant modification from before. One example I frequently use in the pharmaceutical field is if there's a drug that could treat cough, and there's a drug that could treat cold, and you put them together and said this drug treat cold and cough at the same time. It doesn't look very inventive to me. The other requirements is the invention has to be sufficiently disclosed. That is, it is disclosed in the specification that would allow your competitor to repeat the invention after your patent has expired. The last one is it has to have utility, and there are specific definition of that. For pharmaceuticals, there's one exemption, which is method of treatments are considered to have no utility and therefore exempted from obtaining patents in China. So after the office action is issued, then we have to respond to the office action as patent attorney and with your help. And this may go through several cycles. And eventually, if the examiner is satisfied, a decision to grant will be issued and the patent will be granted. And after it is granted, it will be published again. So what happens if the examiner is not happy? So if your application would be rejected, but we can go through that later. But that's a separate process and we'll not go through that in details. So what happened during the prosecution? As I said, the examiner would find documents to say that your application is not novel or inventive. Usually 2 to 4 references will be cited. And as a patent attorney, we need to review the invention in the specification and all the references to come up with the response. We can amend the claims, but we suffer serious limitation on the amendments. That is, the amendments cannot exceed the original disclosure. If you want to add something new that is not contained in the specification, you can forget about that. Even if you want to delete something from the specification, you may get into the problem that it is considered as exceed the original disclosure. Fortunately, typically similar references are cited in the same patent family. A patent family are a bunch of applications in different jurisdictions for the same invention. Usually, they are connected by each other by a same priority claim. So if the prosecution is centralized, that is, the person who drafted the application, the specification also prosecuted worldwide, costs could be saved significantly because the same person would not need to read through your specification repeatedly in different jurisdictions and with higher degree of consistency. Well, and for you to work with a patent attorney, we need two-way trust. It is not only you need to trust the patent attorney, but the patent attorney also need to trust you. And it is a very personal business. So let's go to some takeaway messages. There's one thing I did not talk about is if you do not register your IP particular patents in China, but you file in all other places, for example, in Europe and US, because you remember the flowchart that your patent application will be published at some point. And if you don't file in China after your EP application is published, it is equivalent of giving a free license to everyone in China to work the invention. That is to make the same drugs and sell the drugs in China without even having to bother with you. So if you're happy with that, I'm happy for you. And on behalf of all Chinese in mainland China, thank you very much for your generosity. And IP has to be registered before you have any direct or indirect business discussion in China. As Hamish said, if you have a patent if you have filed a patent in China, not even granted, if the distributor want to play games with you, they have to seriously consider whether you can, after your patent is granted, go after them with patent infringement. And it could result in all the profits that they earn could just vanish and go back to you. So in China, particularly for biotech business and pharmaceutical business, it is mainly invention patent that is useful. And find a patent attorney you can trust and work with. This is a personal feeling. I mean, I have people that say they do not like my personality and do not want to work with me. That's fine. But there are also other people that like me and want to work with me. It is a personal choice. I cannot decide for you. You have to decide that for yourself. Once you find that person that you can trust and work with, stay close with that patent attorney. And remember, registering IP in China serves both offensive and defensive purposes. I think my time is just right, so I would stop sharing my slides for the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Toby, for the presentation. Extremely insightful. We are gonna open once more the Q&A session, focusing on the IPR related issues of today's event. I see that we already have an initial question coming in. We are asked what are the measures that you would like to recommend in order to protect to the maximum extent confidential information and trade secrets when dealing with regulatory authorities. So I'd say...
And for that part, actually, I would like Hamish to chime in, because for regulatory approval, my understanding is that China requires full disclosure of all the administrative regime, dosage, and so on. That is full details to be submitted to the authorities. And there have been cases that I've heard that the authorities somehow well, leak the information to Chinese, to other Chinese factories. And again, as Hamish said, the distributor could be a big problem. So as I said, the best measure is please try to register IP, your patents directed to the drug, as early as possible. Otherwise, I really don't have a good way to deal with such a situation.
Of course.
And good luck trying to keep your trade secret. Why is that? Because as we know now, particularly nowadays, secrets are very difficult to keep, to maintain for an extensive period of time. Yes, we can do that in a limited period of time, say 1-2 years, and within a limited context. But in China, it's particularly difficult. Why is that? Because the staff turnover rate is astronomical. How big are we talking about? It is in the news that in China, a factory has a turnover rate of 50%, 50. And a lot of Chinese companies have staff turnover rate of somewhere between 15 to 30%. It is a revolving door. It is like you put your crown jewel, trade secret, in the middle of a hotel front, in the hotel reception. Good luck trying to keep it in secret. And that is why registered IP is essential in China. That's another factor that contributes to this.
It's extremely clear. Do we have any other questions coming in from the audience? Yeah, see, we have a new one. Should we also register IP before discussing any potential in-licensing opportunities in China? That's the new question that we've received.
Well, that's as I said in my takeaway messages. It is essential for you to register your intellectual property, no matter if it's patent, trademark, designs, whatever. Before you have any business negotiation, a lot of people have this and told me this. Oh, Toby, I will register my IP after my product is successful in China. I'm sorry, that's too late. Remember one thing particular for patents, it has a novelty requirement. When your product is successful in China, you should have already lost your chance to obtain your patent protection in China because it is no longer useful. The novelty requirement, the definition is this: your product cannot be available to anyone in the public in anywhere of the world. That's the definition in China. And my understanding is it is the same definition in Europe. It has nothing to say about where the product is from. That is, if you sell your product in China or anywhere in the world, you have already disclosed your product and your product is no longer novel. So after that, you want to get a patent protection, it would be extremely difficult and the scope would be very, very narrow.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. We have a specific question for a company that's filed already in the EU and USA, but they stress that costs for filing in China are very high for a EU patent firm. So they wonder, should they file via a Chinese patent attorney?
Well, I don't know how much the European patent firm charge for you, but as I said, the cost as I shown in my slide. Of course, it depends on several factors. The first thing is the length. If you have already your patent specification drafted, for pharmaceuticals, the specification tends to be long. That is not 20 pages. Sometimes it could go to 50 pages or 80 pages, and that's why the filing cost could be high because of translation. But there are ways that we could save translation costs for you, and it is up to you to decide what to do. And for prosecution and for responding to an office action, the typical costs for us to handle one office action, for including reporting and then looking into all the documents and giving the client's advice, most of the time we charge at most 2,500 euros. A lot of times it's a lot lower because we can look at what has been done in other jurisdictions to kind of what the term I use is recycle the arguments to save the client's costs. But of course, there are specific issues that we need to take care of. Like, for example, if your major invention is directed to method of treatment, that would be another difficulties that we have to deal with. All in all, is at least my experience, because I file patent applications for my clients all over the world, in the US, in Europe, and in China, in Japan, in Korea, Malaysia, South Africa. My experience is that filing and obtaining patents in China is typically cheaper than in Europe and then in the US. Translation cost is 25,000 euros. Well, you have to tell me how long is a specification. It could be that case. It could be that case, but well, you probably have a very long specification.
I see we don't have any other questions coming from the audience, so I would like to extend my heartfelt thank you to Mr. Toby Mak for his presentation. It was, I believe, extremely helpful, provided very key information that the enterprises need to know about IPR before accessing the Chinese market. So once again, thank you very much for that. I think we can direct ourselves towards the end of the event. So before doing so, I would like to very quickly share my screen in order to ask to all the attendees to take the time to take the survey of EU SME Centre. You have the chance to access it by scanning the QR code here, or you will also receive, after the call ends, a reminder from the Zoom platform to take the survey. Please do, for us it's important because it allows us to gather a bit more information about what can be helpful for European small and medium enterprises in order to better tailor our future activities. And with that being said, thank you very much for taking part, the attendees. Thank you very much to the organizer, to Alexis Bitton from Genopole, to the help desk, to Toby Mak, to Hamish King from Cisema from the help desk. It's been a pleasure organizing this event. I hope everybody has found it helpful. And yes, please follow us, provide us more information about what can be helpful for you. We're always more than happy to provide our services to European small and medium enterprises.
Thank you very much, Davide, also for organizing all of this.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
So once again, thank you very much to everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Nice day. Bye.
Bye.